Hello and good evening, and welcome to Ukra Life. My name is Sarah, and tonight we'll be talking about the US election process, along with some other important news from this week. I received questions over the last couple broadcasts regarding the election, maybe how the process works, and I hope to answer some of those questions and delve into the topic tonight to make it easier to understand, how our process will work this upcoming fall. Just to give some background again, I am a young American living and working in Kyiv as a humanitarian aid worker. I've been invited on this channel to collaborate with Ukra Life to host these videos, aiming to provide some clarity on US-related topics about the United States, maybe relations with Ukraine, and just look at some of the important news each week. Being an American, obviously, I can offer insights into the subjects, including explaining the election process like we'll do today. I hope that by breaking down the process, maybe simplifying some of the intricacies of the election, I can answer some of the questions that we've received over the last couple weeks. So thank you for tuning in, and let's get right into it. We're going to address questions like why Nikki Haley isn't running as an independent, understand why all this is important this week, and to just break it down. So at the very beginning, starting from the top, the United States holds its presidential election every 4 years on the first Tuesday in November. Typically, there are two main political parties in the United States. That would be the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And according to Britannica, specifically, an online encyclopedia, there's a bunch of information about how they're different. But just one example is that the Democratic Party tends to advocate for a larger government role in economic issues, while the Republican Party prefers a smaller government and less involvement in the economy. Again, this is just one example of many examples of how they're different. If our viewers are interested in looking into those differences and maybe having me explain some of that, I'm happy to do that in a future program. And so at the beginning or the year before an election year, candidates who wish to run for the Democratic or Republican Party's nomination for president announce their intentions. Many candidates announced their desire to run in 2023, including President Biden, who announced in April 2023 his re-election campaign as president. These candidates at this point typically set up their teams, begin touring the country to rally support and fundraise for their campaigns. As we saw this year, there are a couple different Republican candidates who wish to run. And for the Democratic Party, there are some candidates, but mainly President Biden was taking the lead as the Democratic Party leader. Not Democratic Party leader, I apologize. I mean as the returning president. The start of the election year, typically in January and February, both political parties usually engage in televised debates, as we saw with the Republican Party. ABC News actually clarified questions about why the Democratic Party wasn't hosting any debates, because it's very unusual for the incumbent president to participate in debates. And with President Biden's case, there was no major challenger to President Biden's campaign. And so this year, we just saw the Republican debates. Additionally, the beginning of the year marks the commencement of primary elections, and that's why these debates occur, so that they can lead into the primary elections. They occur in most states 6 to 9 months prior to the presidential election, and we discussed the primary elections in our last two videos, so if you would like some more information or detailed descriptions of those primary elections, feel free to check out those two videos. This is where voters select their preferred candidate for the party through individual secret ballots. And usually the states hosting the primary considers the voting results to allocate delegates to these winners. And each candidate needs a specific amount of delegates in order to receive the Republican or the Democratic Party nomination. The number of delegates is determined by each political party at both national and state levels. And typically they're chosen from among active party members, leaders, or early supporters of the candidates. And so these delegates represent their state at the national convention and participate in voting to determine the selected presidential nominee. So at this moment, both President Biden and former President Donald Trump, I believe, have reached the number of delegates they both need in order to cement the nomination from either party. And so officially, they will be selected this summer at the convention. That will come probably most likely in July for both the Republican and the Democratic Party. Once the nominees for each political party are selected, the presidential candidates begin and continue their campaigns across the country. Specifically, now they're going head-to-head against each other, attending rallies, participating in debates, outlining their plans for the next 4 years if they are elected. And around this time in the summer as well, or beforehand, they announced also their choice for their vice president in the early spring or summer, as I mentioned. Their running mate, as they like to say in the United States, is chosen to complement their strengths typically and do something that we call balance the ticket. So this means that the president candidate, for example, might pick somebody as their vice president who is stronger in areas where that candidate is weak. Hypothetically, let's say a candidate for the Democratic Party has strong immigration priorities and national domestic plans, but is weak on the foreign policy standpoint. They may choose a running mate or vice president who has stronger foreign policy. So when the voters arrive to the polls, they have a balanced ticket, or the two candidates are balancing each other. And that's just an example. I'm not outlining any specific circumstance with that. As the year progresses, the candidates continue their campaigns, as I mentioned, across the United States. They also use advertisements and focus on initiatives to gain support. And then when the fall comes is when the election occurs, as I mentioned, that Tuesday in November. And we have a very specific electoral process, which is what I wanted to break down as it relates to important news headline this week. So each state is assigned a specific number of electors, we call it, based on its population size, which is determined by the census or the population count conducted every 10 years. This is also reflected in the House of Representatives members that we have. The total number of electors that all states encompass is 538, which includes 535 House of Representative members or seats, and 100 Senate seats, and 3 seats for Washington, D.C., serving as the capital. Each state is allocated electors, as I mentioned, equal to its representation in Congress. So to give a better example and general overview, let's choose a state like Texas, which has more representation and a larger population than some of the other states. Texas has 38 seats in the House of Representatives. However, regardless of size, each state has 2 senators in the U.S. Senate. 2 senators per 50 states equals 100 seats. So Texas, with its 38 House seats and 2 senators, has a total of 40 electoral votes in the Electoral College. A state that's smaller, for example, maybe like West Virginia, with a smaller population, will have less electors or votes in the Electoral College. The Electoral College also operates on a winner-takes-all system. So in most states, except for 2 exceptions in Nebraska and Maine, this means that the candidate who receives the most votes, or the popular vote, as we like to say, will win the state's electoral votes. So let's use Texas as our example again. Let's say, hypothetically, President Biden wins 49% of the populace vote, but Donald Trump wins 51% of the vote. That means all 40 seats or electoral votes will be won by former President Trump, and President Biden will not win any of the seats. And to become president, either candidate has to win 270 electoral votes. So if we're looking at that 438 number, more than half has to be won by an individual in order to win the presidential nomination. This is why sometimes during the election cycle, different news anchors, agencies, when they're reporting about the election, focus more on the Electoral College than they do on the popular vote, because it is possible for a president to lose the popular vote but win the Electoral College. We saw this in 2016 with President Donald Trump's win over Hillary Clinton. He did not win the popular vote, but he did win the Electoral College, and so he became president then. It's important to understand this concept just because it's a little bit complex, but it gives an overall understanding of why maybe, for example, in 2016, President Donald Trump won despite winning the popular vote, or not winning the popular vote, like in many other countries around the world. And it's important for this week because there was a report from the Wall Street Journal that shared an opinion piece about how the 2024 presidential election could come down to only 7 states. Karl Rove reported political pros predict that Donald Trump would probably take 24 states, and 219 out of that 270 he needs electoral votes, while President Joe Biden could likely count on 20 states, including the District of Columbia, with 226 electoral votes. These predictions and these political pros who are analyzing and predicting the 2024 election are using the 2020 election kind of as a background basis and looking at predictable numbers. But that leaves 93 electoral votes in 7 states up for grabs. So that includes Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are going to be deemed as important, but also possible swing states. A swing state, for example, means that in an election, the states, or, over the last 20 years, for example, a state has gone from Republican leaning to Democratic leaning, differing each election. So this is where a lot of the election reporting happens and is focused on, because it's possible for these states to really cement who could be the winner of the 2024 election. And so there's going to be a lot of focus on these specific states over the incoming weeks. It's important looking at these states. Former President Donald Trump carried all of them except Nevada in his 2016 election. However, in 2020 election, former President Donald Trump only won North Carolina, and President Biden won the other 6 states. And so that is an overall view of the Electoral College. It's definitely not a specific expert opinion, but I hope that this general overview is able to simplify the process, maybe clarify some questions, and to address the one question that we had from a viewer that asked, why wouldn't Nikki Haley run as an independent? Outside of the unsuccess of independents candidates in the past, Nikki Haley has said that she's Republican through and through. She would not consider running as an independent because an independent is a specific, party almost in its own. It consists of libertarians, for example. I believe the Green Party. It's a different section. It's not associated with Republicans or Democrats. And she said, she is Republican and she's going to stay that way, and she wouldn't consider running technically for a different party. And it doesn't represent her. So that's why she's not running as an independent, and that's why she stepped out of the race. So that is our general overview of the week. Looking at one other important headline this week, looking at U.S. and Ukrainian relations. The New York Times reported about National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan's recent trip to Kyiv this past week. They reported on Wednesday that Jake Sullivan, who is President Biden's national security advisor, met with President Zelensky and other senior officials of Ukraine, such as Yermak, on Wednesday and this week. The New York Times reported that Sullivan's overall goal was to reaffirm the United States' unwavering commitment to Ukraine's self-defense. Another national security spokeswoman shared that Sullivan wanted to stress the urgent need for the U.S. House of Representatives to pass this national security supplement to meet Ukraine's critical battlefield needs. The reporter for the New York Times said the trip shows rising sense of urgency in the White House to pressure Congress in order to pass billions of dollars for aid to Ukraine. With that funding held back, and looking at future U.S. aid in limbo. The administration also last week sent Ukraine a $30 million package, including air defense interceptors, armor systems, and longer-range missile systems, just to name some of the few things included in that package. But U.S. officials also shared with the New York Times, and it's reported that this particular package is not a long-term solution. It's not sustainable. There needs to be more aid given to Ukraine. And I know the House of Representatives just passed a bill today. I think I got the message about 10 minutes before starting this broadcast that they have passed a national security bill. I'm unsure if it includes this Ukrainian aid. I wasn't able to read through it thoroughly, but I know that they did pass a bill just as we were starting to film. So I'll definitely be getting into that more next week. I want to thank you guys for tuning in again. And hopefully this shed light a little bit on the election process, what's involved. I wanted to use hypothetical examples in order to explain some of the intricate processes within the election. So thank you very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I love the comments. I love reading them. I've definitely taken note of comments, wanting to discuss maybe some more economic, trade, even maybe science, business development within the United States. And so I'll definitely be noting that and working on some programs for that as well. So for tonight, thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.